I am not a historian, but neither are you. So, how about we, the people, learn this stuff together? Welcome to US 101. And today's episode is based on a true story. I mean, they're all based on true stories, but this one is based on a true story because the movie's coming. I this one up. This Friday, August 4th, guys, a brand new movie is going to be premiering nationwide from director Kathryn Bigelow, one of my favorite directors. And the movie is called Detroit. And the movie focuses on the riots that happened in Detroit over the span of 5 days in 1967. I have not seen the movie yet, but I am dying to see it. It looks great. Plus, Kathryn Bigelow, Zero Dark 30, The Hurt Locker, she's 2 for 2, man. But before I or any of you guys see the movie, I wanted to use today's episode to focus on the Detroit riots of 1967 and to tell that story, what took place during the riots, why the riots even started, and why those riots can be seen in hindsight as both sad and inspiring. So to kick off this episode, guys, let us now travel back not to 1967, but to the early 20th century, because remember, context is king, perspective is everything. In the early 20th century, specifically around 1917, 1918, what became known as the Great Migration began. Because remember, guys, when America got involved in World War I, many American men suited up and went overseas to fight, which left the workforce depleted. So a lot of businesses in northern cities like New York, Chicago, Detroit, Philadelphia, they reached out to African Americans that were living in the South and they said, Come north, come hang out with us, man. You can work in our cities, you can make a life for yourself, you can find your future here, come hang with us. And a lot of African Americans jumped at that opportunity, so they packed up everything they had, they gathered their families, they made their way north, crossed that Mason-Dixon line, and it's estimated that around 1 million black people made their way north during the first Great Migration. Yes, there was more than one. The second Great Migration began when America decided to get involved in World War II. Many men suited up, went overseas again to go fight Hitler and the Japanese and the Italians, and again the workforce was depleted, so more African Americans made their way north to work in these cities like New York and Chicago and Detroit, and this time it's estimated that around 5 million black people made their way north during the second Great Migration. Let's see, here's the thing. After World War II, when all those GIs come back home and they're kissing their sweethearts and we're gonna make a family and have babies and all this other stuff, a lot of these GIs that came home didn't have that job that they were holding because it was now being held by somebody else. It might have been held by an African American that came north to find their fortune in northern cities. Furthermore, following World War II, in a lot of cities, many black people were living next to a lot of white families, and a lot of white families did not like that. They did not like living in a neighborhood that was now being populated by blacks and other minorities, Latinos, and so forth and so on. So many white families after World War II packed up and moved out to these new developments that they were creating called the suburbs. Now, because a lot of white people moved out of the cities in droves, this so-called white flight, many African Americans were staying in those cities. But that didn't mean that it was easy for them to live there. A lot of white realtors and a lot of white renters that were still in these cities were dissuading African Americans from living in the more affluent neighborhoods, the nicer neighborhoods in the city. Instead, they would persuade them to, no, you don't want to live here. You want to live down here in the less than savory neighborhoods. At the same time, by the way, anytime a white couple would go to that same white realtor, that same white renter and say, hey, we'd like to live in this very affluent neighborhood that African-American couple is just asking about, but you said you didn't have any apartments. No, those white realtors found apartments real quick for that couple. On top of that, policing in predominantly African-American neighborhoods was far stricter than other neighborhoods, and on top of that, African-Americans were still facing discrimination from white people on a regular basis. This sign is all you need for evidence. Which now brings us to the early morning hours of July 23rd, 1967 on 12th Street in Detroit's Virginia Park neighborhood. 12th Street in Virginia Park was a bustling hub of nightlife for African Americans, and one particular establishment that African Americans would frequent at night would be these after-hour joints, these illegal after-hour joints in which they were selling liquor without liquor licenses. These places were also known as blind pigs. And again, because these after-hour joints existed, the police knew about them and would regularly raid these establishments establishments, kicking out all the patrons, harassing them, belittling them, so forth and so on. And on top of that, again, Virginia Park, being a predominantly African-American neighborhood, the police had no problem going through there on a regular basis and just harassing the citizens citizens that lived there. So, on July 23rd at 3:30 a.m., the police raid a blind pig that's being run by a man named Walter Scott. Now, Scott is holding a party at his after-hours joint for a lot of servicemen and a lot of veterans. You know, there's quite a few veterans in the place. They're having a big party for him, including 2 servicemen that had just come back from Vietnam. The police go in, they bust the place up, and they start escorting all the patrons out one by one. There's a few patrons in this after-hours joint at this time. There's about 80 people in there. So they start escorting them out one at a time, and as they're escorting them out, a crowd starts to form outside of the blind pig. And by the time the last patron is escorted out, around 200 people have lined up along the street to see what's going on. And then, out of nowhere, a bottle is thrown in the direction of the police, and it smashes on the ground. And soon afterwards, even more bottles are thrown in the direction of the police. One bottle actually hits the window of a patrol car and smashes it. And soon after, following the deluge of glass bottles that are being thrown at the police, a small riot starts to break out, and before you know it, there's a lot more people on the street, and they start looting the stores that are on 12th Street. And all the while, the police see this, and they're like, we are gonna get the out of here. We don't need to be here right now. They leave. Rioting starts, looting starts, and around 6:30 in the morning, a small fire breaks out, which would eventually engulf multiple buildings on the street. Firefighters are called in to put out the blaze, but when they show up to try to put the fire out, they are attacked by the ever-growing mob. So by this point, the mayor of Detroit sees what's going on, and he goes to the governor of Michigan, George Romney, Mitt Romney's father, and he says to him, the Detroit PD ain't gonna handle this stuff, and they're attacking the firefighters. I'm gonna need a little more help. What do you got for me? So the governor assigns 300 Michigan state troopers to go in and try to quell the riot and quell the violence. That does not work. So the governor takes it one step further, and he calls on the Michigan National Guard to go to Detroit and to try to suppress this riot. But the riots keep increasing. Looting continues. More fires break out. More violence breaks out. It's even said that there were snipers that were positioned in buildings all throughout the neighborhood, and they were shooting at law enforcement, firefighters, and random people. It wasn't just like looting and fires. People were dying in the streets now. Eventually, it gets to the point where President Lyndon B. Johnson has to call on the military to go to Detroit and to put this thing down. He calls on 2,000 Army paratroopers to head into Detroit, and they get there on Tuesday, July 25, 1967, and they start patrolling the streets with armored vehicles and tanks. Tanks! In Detroit! Ultimately, the military would be the force that would suppress the rioting and restore order to the city of Detroit. But by this point, by July 27, the riots had gone on for 5 days, and the damage was done. Here's the stat sheet for you. It said that 43 people died during the riots. On top of that, numerous people were injured. Reports range anywhere from over 300 to over 1,000 people. On top of that, it's also said that over 7,000 people, I'm not exaggerating, 7,000 people were arrested, and anywhere between 1,400 to 2,000 buildings were damaged due to looting or to fire. And here's the big question, man. Here's what I want to posit to you guys, and I hope that you guys will respond in the comments section. Did the riots need to happen? Could the riots in Detroit have been avoided? Now, before you answer, let me just say that, remember, again, in Detroit, African Americans were a group that were constantly belittled and marginalized. Not to mention that the city itself was also going through an economic crisis, since many of the jobs, primarily automotive jobs, automotive factories and stuff, were shutting down in Detroit City, in the city center, and they were moving out to the suburbs, where mostly white people lived. Add to that the nightlife that African Americans enjoyed and appreciated on 12th Street was time and time again cut short by the police. They would go in there and they would raid all these establishments over and over again. What did you think was going to happen when you pile all this shit on top of each other? So I'll ask you guys again. Do you think the Detroit riots of 1967 needed to happen? Or do you think they could have been avoided? Or do you feel that this was unavoidable? Do you think that after marginalizing and belittling and harassing African Americans, and even though they may have tried to keep a stiff upper lip the whole time and try to take the high road eventually, you're going to keep beating on somebody to the point where they're going to have no choice but to fight back, to make themselves known and make themselves heard? So let me know your thoughts in the comment section. I look forward to discussing and debating with you. And that, my friends, is it for another episode of US 101. Thank you guys so much for watching. Really do appreciate it. And thanks to all of you that have been subscribing to the channel, liking the videos, you've been commenting, you've been sharing the videos. I cannot thank you guys enough for your involvement in US 101. I really do appreciate it. As always, you can follow US 101 on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram. All the links down below in the description box. And guys, I'm not promoting the movie Detroit. This movie's not a promotion for the movie, but I will recommend that you go see it because I think it's going to be an interesting look at a dark point in American history, and a point that many people may not know about. I certainly didn't know that much about the Detroit riots before doing the research on this episode, and now I want to go see that movie just to kind of see it full blast, you know, and just see what it's all about. So go check out the movie, see what it's all about, and if you see the movie, let me know what you think of it. I am all done, and yeah. If you go to the movies with me, get me some popcorn, get me some Bunch of Crunch, and get me a Coke Zero. That's my go-to snack combo, and I am sticking to it. See you guys later, man.